Governor Charles Grayson's black town car rolled slowly into Brentville's town center, his security detail stepping briskly alongside. The day had started like any other for him, calls to make, hands to shake, meetings to rush through. He had nearly forgotten the anniversary ceremony altogether, viewing it as little more than a photo opportunity before more important engagements with donors. But the moment his car turned the corner and the government building came into view, he knew something was wrong. Rows upon rows of veterans, their faces withered by time and sacrifice, stood in complete, disciplined silence. Their uniforms varied, some sharp and new, others frayed and worn by decades. There were crisp dress blues, battered camouflage jackets, and plain clothes adorned only with medals. Beside them stood young children holding miniature flags, their small hands clutching the fabric tightly against the brisk morning air. Mothers, widows, and sons of the fallen held photographs against their chests. The wind carried the faint scent of cold metal and old leather, the deep, human smell of memory and waiting. Governor Grayson opened the car door hesitantly, feeling the disapproving weight of 1,000 eyes. His shoes struck the pavement with hollow echoes. No one shouted. No one moved. Their silence was sharper than any protest, cutting through the layers of polished arrogance that had shielded him for so long. A small group stepped forward from the gathered ranks. Veterans in their 70s and 80s, bent backs, silver hair, but eyes sharp and clear. They approached the governor slowly, carrying a single letter in an unadorned envelope. There were no speeches. No accusations. Just the silent extension of the letter into his trembling hands. He broke the seal clumsily, the paper crinkling too loudly in the heavy air. The letter was short, typed in a simple font, no signatures, no names. To mock the uniform is to mock the sacrifice. To mock the sacrifice is to mock the freedom that placed you in your office. There was no anger in the words, only a solemn finality, as if a door had quietly closed behind him forever. The murmuring of an old engine pulled his attention away. An olive-drab military jeep, paint faded and tires worn thin, bounced awkwardly over the cracks in the asphalt. In the back, wrapped in a simple wool blanket against the biting wind, sat Willis Harper. The old man's face was unreadable, neither proud nor bitter. His hands, rough and calloused from a lifetime of quiet work, rested lightly on his knees. His military jacket, the same one mocked the day before, looked almost regal now beneath the early morning sun. The crowd parted as the jeep rolled to a stop in the center of the square, a living corridor of respect. From the passenger side, a woman emerged, young, perhaps in her early 30s, dressed in a simple navy coat. She clutched a small wooden box to her chest like it contained something far too precious to be trusted to her hands alone. Slowly, she approached Willis, her breath visible in the cold air. Her hands shook as she opened the box to reveal a silver medallion, gleaming despite the decades it had survived. The crowd leaned in collectively, not out of curiosity but reverence, as she lifted the medallion and pinned it just above the left breast pocket of Willis's jacket. It was not an award from the government. Not a token handed out for politics or ceremony. It was something older, deeper, a family heirloom passed down through generations, and trusted only to those whose actions had secured the very future of that family. The woman didn't speak, but the tears tracking down her cheeks said more than words could. Her father had been one of the 19 young soldiers Willis had carried through fire and chaos decades ago in a forgotten jungle. He had returned because of Willis. Had lived, loved, and raised a family because of him. Willis lifted a trembling hand to the medallion and touched it briefly, as if afraid that it would vanish like a dream if he pressed too hard. Around him, a ripple moved through the assembled crowd, not noise, not movement, but something deeper. A collective breath held, a communal heartbeat shared. Then a low hum vibrated the chilly air. A large portable screen flickered to life at the edge of the square. For a moment it showed only static, then the image sharpened into focus, rows of soldiers standing at rigid attention under a cloudless sky. Somewhere far away, another morning had broken. A young captain stepped forward, dressed in fatigues crisp from a fresh press. His face was hard, his jaw set, but his eyes shone with unmistakable emotion. "We honor you today, Staff Sergeant Willis Harper, he said into the microphone, his voice steady but low with feeling. Because of you, families were made. Futures were built. Because of your bravery, countless lives were written who would have otherwise been lost. Behind him, the entire battalion saluted in one precise, thunderous motion. Arms rose together, a forest of gratitude. The screen captured it all, boots locked at attention, chins lifted, rifles gleaming under the desert sun. Somewhere in the crowd, a small boy removed his cap and placed it over his heart. An elderly woman lowered herself carefully to one knee. Even the air seemed to pause, unwilling to intrude on the sacredness of the moment. Governor Grayson stood rooted in place, the letter still clutched in his hand. Around him, the silence grew heavier, deeper, until it became impossible to bear. His knees buckled slightly, and in a gesture that stunned even his own guards, he removed his tailored jacket and sank to one knee on the cold pavement. He bowed his head low, the epitome of humility. Willis, still seated in the battered jeep, watched with a kind of infinite patience. After a long moment, he motioned weakly for someone to help him stand. 2 young soldiers rushed forward, supporting him gently under each arm. With visible effort, Willis approached the governor. His steps were slow, his breathing shallow. But there was an undeniable power in his movements, as if the very earth beneath him yielded passage. When he reached Grayson, Willis placed a hand on the governor's shoulder. It was a small gesture, but one that carried all the weight of forgiveness. It spoke of the strength to see past humiliation, to lift another not because he deserved it, but because it was the right thing to do. The crowd did not cheer. They did not clap. Instead, they stood in solemn witness as dignity restored dignity, and a broken circle was made whole again. The cold wind carried no words, but it carried meaning. And somewhere, behind the gathering clouds, the sun broke through, just for a moment, lighting Willis Harper's silver medallion until it blazed like a star against the backdrop of the quiet town. The town of Brentville seemed to exhale as Willis Harper steadied Governor Grayson on his feet. The two men, separated by decades and experience, stood facing each other in the crisp morning air. Around them, veterans remained at silent attention, their breath rising like ghostly banners into the cold sky. No one spoke. No one dared break the fragile solemnity of that moment. Governor Grayson's eyes were rimmed with red. His hands, once so sure and commanding, now trembled with the shame he could no longer hide. He opened his mouth to speak, but Willis raised a hand, not in anger, not in command, but in a simple gesture that asked for silence. It was not the time for words. Not yet. Slowly, Willis turned to the gathered crowd. His gaze swept over the faces, young soldiers in crisp uniforms, old warriors leaning heavily on canes, mothers clutching photographs of sons who would never come home. The town had come not for spectacle, but for honor. To defend something older and nobler than any political office or fleeting insult. The moment stretched on, a living monument built not of stone or bronze, but of quiet respect and unwavering memory. Later that afternoon, long after the veterans had dispersed and the last flags had been carefully folded and stored, the town council gathered in an emergency session inside the Brentville Municipal Building. For once, every seat was filled. Citizens lined the walls, standing shoulder to shoulder, refusing to let apathy claim what dignity demanded be addressed. On the agenda was a single item, the recognition and redress of the wrong done to Staff Sergeant Willis Harper. Governor Grayson, still wearing his shirt without the formal jacket, stood before them all, not as an official, but as a man stripped bare of titles. His prepared speech lay forgotten on the podium. He spoke instead from the heart, his voice rough with remorse. He announced the establishment of an annual scholarship in Willis Harper's name, aimed at supporting the children of military families in pursuit of education and service. It would be called the Harper Honor Grant, and the first recipients would be named the following year on the very anniversary that had once been marred by disrespect. He also proposed, and the council unanimously agreed, to convert the vacant lot beside the town square into a memorial garden. A place where service, sacrifice, and unseen acts of kindness would be celebrated, not just in stone, but in living, growing beauty. It would be called Harper's Garden. There would be no grand statues. Instead, there would be small plaques tucked among the roses and dogwoods, each one bearing the name of a local veteran, a fallen soldier, or an unsung hero who had quietly shaped Brentville's soul. And at the heart of it all, on a simple bench facing the sunrise, would be a bronze plate inscribed with Willis Harper's name and the words, "Dignity needs no audience. Honor needs no reward." The council's decisions were met not with applause, but with a long, standing silence, the kind of silence that speaks louder than any clapping ever could. News of Brentville's quiet revolution traveled far beyond its borders. Articles appeared in military newsletters, on veteran advocacy websites, and even in major newspapers. People who had never heard of the town before now knew its story, a town that chose humility over pride, dignity over power. But Willis Harper himself wanted none of it. When the committee approached him for approval of the plans, he simply smiled, a soft, tired smile, and said they were free to do what they thought best. His life had never been about awards or attention. He had acted once, long ago, because 19 lives had hung in the balance. And later, because restoring a broken starter engine for a struggling single mother or patching the roof of a homeless veteran's shelter had simply been the right thing to do. He never asked for anything in return. He never wanted to be thanked. The day after the council meeting, under a sky still bruised with the colors of dawn, Willis returned to the town square. The celebration had ended. The chairs were gone. The screens packed away. Only the faint impressions in the frosted grass remained, like memories slowly being erased by time. He walked slowly, leaning heavily on his cane. His jacket hung loose around his frame, the medallion still pinned proudly over his heart. He paused in the center of the square, where yesterday he had been honored without expecting it. There, at the base of the flagpole, he found a small gathering of simple offerings. Fresh flowers in jam jars. Worn American flags carefully folded. A thermos of coffee still warm to the touch. Handwritten notes tucked between stones. One note, scribbled on the back of a diner receipt, caught his eye. The handwriting was crooked, almost childlike. "Because of you, my dad came home. Thank you, Mr. Harper." Beside it was a drawing, a crude sketch of a soldier holding hands with a little girl. Stick figures, but full of life. Willis's throat tightened painfully. He tucked the note into the inside pocket of his jacket, over his heart, and stood for a long time in the growing light. A quiet shuffle of boots made him turn. A young sailor approached, barely 20, with the sharp bearing of someone freshly graduated from boot camp. His uniform was immaculate, his cap tucked under one arm. The sailor came to a halt before Willis and snapped a crisp salute. There was no audience. No cameras. Just a simple gesture of respect from one generation to another. Willis returned the salute as best he could, his arm slow but steady. When the sailor offered his hand, Willis shook it firmly. In the boy's palm, Willis felt the same fierce, unbroken spirit he had once carried in his own younger days. No speeches were exchanged. No grand declarations. Only the simple, silent understanding that the torch had been passed, and that honor, true honor, does not fade with time. It is carried forward by those who still believe that sacrifice is sacred, that dignity is worth defending, and that kindness is never wasted. As the young sailor walked away, disappearing down the empty street, Willis turned once more to the rising sun. The golden light caught the medallion pinned over his heart, making it gleam like a silent flame. And so he walked home, slowly, steadily, every step a quiet defiance against the passage of time. The town behind him stood just a little taller that day, because of him. And though the world would move on, as it always does, somewhere deep within Brentville's beating heart, the memory of Willis Harper would endure. Not because he demanded it, but because kindness, given without expectation, leaves a mark that no insult, no humiliation, and no passage of years can ever erase. Evening fell over Brentville in a hush of golden mist, soft and forgiving. The sun slipped low behind the rooftops, painting the brick facades in hues of amber and rose. Streetlights flickered to life one by one, their warm halos pooling on the cracked sidewalks. A gentle breeze stirred fallen leaves along the town square, carrying with it the faint scent of wood smoke and distant baking bread. Willis Harper stood at the edge of the empty square, his breath rising faintly in the cooling air. His jacket was buttoned neatly, the silver medallion catching the last light of the sun like a star pinned to his chest. Around him, the quiet was complete, broken only by the occasional creak of a swinging shop sign or the far-off bark of a dog returning home. In the place where hundreds had gathered just the morning before, where honor had been defended not with shouts but with silent rows of steadfast hearts, the square now lay still. The chairs were gone. The temporary stage dismantled. Only the traces remained, the worn paths in the grass, the faint imprint of boots and wheels, the soft memory of eyes that had witnessed something worth remembering. At the center, placed carefully as if by invisible hands, sat a wooden chair. Upon it rested a folded American flag, perfectly creased, a thermos of black coffee with steam still rising from its spout, and a small stack of handwritten notes weighted down by a river stone. Around the chair, townsfolk had left humble offerings, bouquets of wildflowers tied with string, battered dog tags resting atop white carnations, and faded photographs of loved ones framed by trembling candles. Willis moved toward the chair with deliberate slowness, his cane tapping a soft rhythm against the concrete. He paused before it, taking in every detail. The flag was not government-issued, it was old, its colors muted by years of display in a family home. The thermos bore scratches and dents, as if it had survived many winters. The notes were written in every kind of hand, young and shaky, old and elegant, clumsy and careful. He bent, wincing slightly, and picked up the top note. It was scrawled in pencil on notebook paper, the letters large and earnest. "Dear Mr. Harper, my brother says you saved Grandpa in the war. Thank you for my family." Willis closed his eyes briefly, feeling the sharp ache of memory bloom in his chest. He replaced the note carefully, as if afraid it might break. Behind him, the soft scuff of approaching footsteps stirred the air. He turned to see a young sailor, barely more than a boy, approaching with measured steps. His uniform was sharp, the white of his cap bright against the deepening twilight. The sailor stopped 2 paces away and raised his right hand in a perfect salute. No cameras watched. No officials bore witness. Only the empty square, the folding shadows, and the last tender light of the day bore testimony. Willis returned the salute, his arm slow but steady. When the sailor stepped forward and extended his hand, Willis grasped it firmly. In that silent handshake, something vast passed between them, something old as the country itself. Sacrifice, duty, honor. Things carried forward not in grand parades, but in small, private acts of remembrance like this one. The sailor opened his other hand to reveal a coin. Not currency, but a challenge coin, simple, worn at the edges, its insignia faded with time. Willis recognized it instantly. It was from the 82nd Airborne Division, the very unit he had once served with. The boy must have gone searching for it, must have found it in some dusty shop or among a veteran's treasures, just for this moment. He pressed it into Willis's palm without a word. The coin's weight was slight, but in Willis's hand, it felt heavier than gold. The sailor saluted once more, then turned and disappeared into the thickening dusk, his boots clicking sharply on the pavement until the night swallowed the sound. Willis stood alone for a long while, staring at the coin. The town, silent and watchful, seemed to embrace him in the gathering dark. He tucked the coin into his jacket pocket, where it settled beside the crumpled notes and the folded receipt from earlier that morning. Small things. Paper and metal. But to him, they were more precious than any official commendation. Finally, with the first stars beginning to prick the velvet sky, Willis turned toward home. His steps were slow, deliberate, the journey marked by the soft creak of his worn boots and the steady tap of his cane. As he walked the familiar streets, passing shuttered shops and darkened homes, memories seemed to unfurl from every corner, the years spent fixing engines in the dusty garage at the edge of town, the evenings hammering nails into roofs for veterans who had nowhere else to turn, the countless quiet kindnesses given without expectation. Each memory drifted after him like autumn leaves caught on a restless wind. When he reached his modest house, paint peeling slightly at the eaves, he paused at the front gate. Above the door, an old porch light flickered to life, bathing the steps in soft yellow light. For a moment, Willis stood very still, feeling the night wrap around him, feeling the quiet gratitude of a town whose heart had grown stronger because of him. He thought of all he had lost. Comrades fallen in faraway jungles. Friends who had slipped away over the long, hard years. Margaret, the love of his youth, whose laughter still lived somewhere deep inside him. But he also thought of what remained. The steadfast loyalty of strangers. The legacy of lives saved, of futures made possible. The undeniable truth that kindness, once given, does not die, it echoes forward, rippling through generations unseen. He climbed the steps slowly, easing himself into the old rocking chair that had belonged to Margaret's father. The seat creaked as he settled in. He pulled a woolen blanket over his knees, feeling the coin and the notes pressing lightly against his chest. Above him, the stars bloomed wider and deeper across the ink-black sky, each one a pinprick of hope. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the night carry him. In that small, forgotten corner of the world, one man's quiet courage had changed everything. Not with speeches. Not with demands. But with steadfast dignity, with unwavering kindness given freely to those who would never forget. True honor, Willis Harper knew, was not found in grand gestures or official decrees. It lived in the hearts of those who understood sacrifice. It lived in every handshake, every folded note, every flag carefully placed at dawn. It lived in him. And long after he was gone, it would live on. The seasons shifted quietly over Brentville, as they always had. Spring crept in with cautious green, painting the branches with buds and carpeting the memorial garden with tender shoots of color. Harper's Garden, they called it now, though no sign shouted the name. Only a simple wooden arch bore a small plaque carved by hand, nearly hidden among climbing roses. The town breathed differently after that day. Where once hurried indifference had filled the streets, now there was an undercurrent of something gentler. Strangers held doors open a little longer. Children planted flags along the sidewalks on Memorial Day without being asked. Young men tipped their hats to elderly veterans on Sunday mornings. Not because of a law. Not because of ceremony. But because they remembered. The scholarship founded in Willis Harper's name blossomed into a tradition. Each year, on the anniversary of Brentville's liberation, a gathering formed at the town square. Students, fresh-faced and eager, accepted their awards with solemn pride. Families of veterans, some long dead, some standing proudly in the crowd, came forward with photographs and letters, laying them at the base of the flagpole as quiet offerings to history. And each year, a new chair was placed in the center of the gathering. Empty, save for a folded flag and a thermos of hot coffee. A ritual born not of policy, but of love. For a time, Willis Harper continued to attend the ceremonies, sitting quietly in the second row, his jacket threadbare but his medallion polished to a soft gleam. He never spoke publicly. He never sought the microphone. His presence was enough. A steady reminder that the quiet courage of one man could be a cornerstone upon which many lives could stand. As the years unfolded, time, as it always does, made its claims. Fewer and fewer recognized the old man with the kind eyes and the slow gait. New families moved into town, bringing new stories, new struggles. But Harper's Garden remained, tended faithfully by volunteers, its pathways worn smooth by countless grateful feet. When Willis passed, it happened as gently as a candle flickering out at the end of a long, good night. No struggle. No fear. Just a slow exhale beneath a quilt stitched by Margaret's hands decades earlier. The town mourned in the way it had learned from him, without spectacle, without demand. They lowered the flags to half-staff. They left fresh coffee and handwritten notes by the bench where he had so often watched the sunrise. Children planted daisies around the garden's edge, yellow and white and brave against the cooling earth. At his simple gravesite, marked by a modest stone etched with the same words from the garden, dignity needs no audience. Honor needs no reward. The people of Brentville came not to weep loudly, but to remember quietly. To lay small stones, notes, ribbons, medals at the base of the marker. to say thank you in the only way that mattered. Among them stood the sailor who had once pressed a coin into Willis's hand, now a man with new lines around his eyes and his own medals pinned neatly to his chest. He knelt by the grave, removed the challenge coin Willis had once carried, and placed it gently on the stone. A promise kept. Time wore on. The world outside Brentville churned forward, loud and fast and often unkind. But within the garden's gentle borders, the spirit of one man lived on, woven into every whispered prayer, every cautious hope, every quiet kindness offered to a stranger. Children who never knew his face learned his story in schoolbooks written by teachers who had once seen him cross the square at dawn. Couples who had met by chance on Veterans Day walks through the garden named their sons and daughters Harper in tribute. Young soldiers returned home and knelt by the bench before they rejoined the living. Each year, when the anniversary of the town's liberation returned, and the town square filled once more, an old tape recording would play over the speakers. No grand speech. No ceremony. Just the gravelly voice of Willis Harper, captured one summer evening when a journalist had asked him what heroism meant. His words, simple and true, echoed across the square. Heroism isn't medals. It isn't speeches. It's just doing what's needed without asking who's watching. Even when nobody ever knows. The crowd, from toddlers waving flags to elders with polished canes, would fall still at the sound of his voice. Heads bowed. Hands pressed against hearts. Tears shone openly and unashamed. And somewhere in the wide, open sky above them, it seemed, just for a moment, that the world grew a little quieter. A little kinder. As if even the heavens paused to honor the life of a man who had proven that the smallest acts of dignity could become legends if only carried forward with love. As the sun dipped low and the flags snapped gently against their poles, Brentville would glow in the soft, forgiving light of remembrance. And in the hush of that golden hour, the people of the town would know, beyond any doubt, that true honor is never lost. It is planted, like seeds, in the hearts of those willing to believe that kindness without question is enough.